This is unfortunate, but things move so quickly in like DeFi or on-chain finance that basically every week there was another example in that run-up of a team that didn't do it right, spectacular meltdown. So, I mean, there wasn't even like really an education problem. Everything is going to be tokenized. Everything is a market. So if everything is a market, everything is susceptible to manipulation and everything kind of needs risk management. And that's our thesis that we see playing out in real time. There's some pretty big stuff that we're working on internally, which really expands the vision of what we do.
Hello and welcome to the Protocol Services Podcast, where we chat with specialist teams on the ground floor, from risk advisors, treasury managers, delegates, core devs, and everything in between, to learn more about these businesses really helping progress the decentralized protocols, building the future Web3. I'm your host, Jack Purdy, and with me I have Omer Goldberg, founder, CEO of Chaos Labs. Welcome, Omer.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jack. I'm happy to join today.
Excited for this convo. So to kick things off, so you sort of started your career, right? You're working in big tech, and then you decide to found this, rather kind of technical, in the weeds DeFi risk modeling platform. What brought you to that point?
So actually, previous to my tenure at Meta and Instagram, I had two companies in the cybersecurity and developer infrastructure space. So it was always very technical. And at Facebook and Instagram, really the things that I focused on were security, performance, cloud optimization, also like really kind of gravitated to the more technical part of the stack. At the same time, in parallel to my, traditional tech career, very much into crypto since 2013, really watching kind of DeFi evolve. And around 2019, 2020, when TVL starts ballooning, I started looking at how the space is developing. And you had all of these exciting kind of V0 DeFi primitives that were growing extremely quickly. I think back then it was Compound and Aave. I had recently, renamed from ETHLend. I was kind of playing with my own capital and really reading through the contracts and saw all of these parameters that were basically dictating the terms of every loan, liquidation, swap, P&L computation, just really critical stuff. And started kind of just browsing the forums and realized that people kind of didn't really know how to address or approach setting them in a data-driven way. It was very hand wavy, and there was good reason for that because it was pretty complex. So I was doing my own diligence, right, and trying to understand whether or not I wanted to deposit my capital in these protocols, and just kind of realized that in the same way that I was diligencing it, a lot of other people would probably benefit from that as well. So built the first version of Chaos, which is actually different than what we do today. It was a developer kind of cloud platform. And the idea was that I provided this SDK for running simulations on blockchain forks. You could kind of manipulate the state of the chain, of price trajectories, volatility, liquidity. And really the goal was to stress test the protocol and understand how it would fare under various conditions. And that was the idea I went to market with, right? So the first version of Chaos Labs was like a developer platform. It gave you kind of this sandbox and toolkit to run simulations. And the idea was that every protocol would run their own simulations, because who would know how to optimize their protocols better than the founders themselves, or at least that was the thought. And that's how we got started. That ended up being wrong, that hypothesis, but it actually brought us to where we are today.
And how did you build conviction in the market for that service? Because it's not like many DeFi protocols were doing that, right? Obviously, teams had some in-house risk functions. Gauntlet existed, but in terms of thinking about the TAM for this type of service, or really validation to go off and start your own company doing this.
Yeah, so I think that the conviction was born from a few places. So first of all, at Facebook and Instagram, I think a lot of people think about it as a net product company, but it's actually, I think, one of the greatest technology companies. And what's really unique and characterizing is kind of the way that products are shipped. So whether you're focused on performance or security or optimization like I was, or you're building a client or user-facing feature, everything is rigorously A/B tested. They really kind of, everything is kind of data science. So at Facebook, you have the luxury of having several billion users. And when you're building a feature, you'll just A/B test it in production to a few hundred million users, and you'll see whether or not it improves or regresses core metrics. And based on that, you'll make decisions on how the application or product should develop. Now, this was I was really sold on this. And obviously, Facebook and Meta have been really successful in building products that people love. And when I was looking at DeFi coming from that perspective, I said, hey, it would be great if we could A/B test, but we're dealing with value here, and it's not. The cost of being wrong in finance is actually way higher than social media, because if we messed up an experiment in Instagram, like worst case, your feed wouldn't load. And here, you don't want to tell someone like, sorry for liquidating you. You were in an experiment group. So what is the next best thing that you can do? And then the next best thing is simulations. So that is like really much believed in kind of the data-driven approach to managing application development. Realize you can test in production. The next best thing is this high fidelity environment that you can work in. So that's what kind of got me with the initial conviction. At the same time, I had this just general conviction that, blockchains and on-chain finance were the future, that they were going to eat more and more of the world's kind of market share in terms of value that was being transacted on it. But at the same time, in my mind, that belief couldn't exist and be true if tools like what we were building at Chaos didn't exist as well. Because I think the other thing was, we need to be at least as secure, if not more, than traditional finance and traditional finance rails in order for this migration to happen, right? So that just it felt very non-speculative for me, very real, very tangible. And just in speaking with early customers, everyone kind of agreed. Nobody wanted to make less data-driven decisions, but the way that it manifested, I think, was a little bit different than the original product vision.
So I'm curious. So you mentioned the initial vision, building the SDK and sort of simulation environment to stress test these protocols. Like, how did that thesis evolve over time to kind of get to you guys to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, so initially, the initial thesis that I had was like thinking of the product teams and the companies that I came from. I was like, who am I to optimize their protocol? I mean, they're full time on this thing. Certainly they'll know better than I do, and I'm just here to kind of build infrastructure and tools to help them get where they need to. But kind of what I discovered was that this was really a new category also from a technical perspective. So if you think of DeFi, it's like this Venn diagram of like smart contract development, obviously, financial engineering, blockchains, security, game theory, all of these different things. And really the overlap of people who had that experience was non-existent effectively. So you had people who were more technical and on the software engineering stack and maybe understood smart contracts. You had mechanism designers who usually had like a economic background. You had kind of traders who came in from TradFi, but nobody saw the whole picture. And this made it really difficult for people to think about, how do I optimize the protocol, right? Because you actually need to be pretty advanced in all of those domains to do this in a way that's meaningful. And more so, like even if you knew how you wanted to approach it, implementing it was actually hard technically, right? Like building a simulation platform for a blockchain environment is difficult. I think blockchains are infamous for not scaling. In order to get kind of statistical significance in what you're building, you need like hundreds of thousands of runs, right? So all of this was like a perfect storm and people didn't know how to do it. It took me time to understand that because most customers were willing to pay a lot, but would just come and say like, we need a little help getting set up. Over time, I realized that a little help was a lot of help. And over the first year, I was in denial. I was like, it's Aave and we'll dog food the product for them. And very kind of reading a lot of Paul Graham essays, like let's do things that don't scale, right? But we're still like an infra and a cloud company, not a risk company. But really, I think about 12 to 15 months into it, I just realized there was just like a huge pull in the market. There was a huge need for it. I gained conviction that actually a risk platform could be productized as well, which hadn't previously been done in the industry. So yeah, just listening to users and also conviction in the fact that we could build a great product and platform and not do services was enough. And then we kind of took the leap. And I think it was late 2021 or 2022. I brought the team in and said, guys, I know you joined like a cloud developer Web3 company, but now we're a risk company. And said, let's take all of that infrastructure that we had built out over the first year. Instead of giving tools, we'll build these end-to-end products. They'll be super transparent and whoever wants to go deep and understand will be able to, but they'll also just be able to kind of, have trust and confidence that the system is outputting parameters that'll help them scale in a secure way. So that was like the early journey.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's funny because I feel like that's been a common thread, I think, amongst a number of companies I've spoken to, whether it's like data analytics, research, kind of governance products, where just the state of the market where like building a decentralized protocol is such a complex task that like no core team can do everything themselves. So if you're able to provide a valuable service, like they'll pay for it, right? You can almost become like outsourced team as if you were, right, like the credit risk department at a bank, but now doing that for a protocol, and then can start to think to, standardize this such that it can still be a scalable, investable SaaS company.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're aiming for. And I think there's a couple of different kind of verticals where people have tried to do this. And I think security and risk is actually one of the verticals in which it's worked best, just because, like, if you're looking at kind of budget allocations for security and risk, like in comparison to Web 2 companies, it's just larger here because the risk and security vector and surface is much larger and teams understand that. So there's a lot of education on this. I think that like companies in other domains, I think their first challenge is explaining to potential customers or DAOs or protocols why this is valuable. It's not something that we ever ran into because I think it's just evident if you watch the news and keep up to date with things that happen on a day-to-day basis in the space.
Yeah. And so I'd be curious to know a little bit more about what these engagements look like, right? So say, PerpDex comes to you and says like, hey, we kind of need help. We don't have the in-house capabilities for this. What is sort of step one to getting like the lay of the land per se on, maybe like the nuances of this protocol, or like how you guys kind of think about, optimizing and designing a risk framework?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it kind of the first like branch and how we deal with it starts with like the protocol architecture. So today, like a few architectures have emerged, and you see a lot of applications basing themselves off of it. So like compound forks, Aave forks, GMX forks, things of this nature. If you're one of those, we basically have like a plug and play solution for you. And that's easy enough. And then there's, this other side of the world where someone's building like a unique mechanism and kind of we need to understand what we want to do for them. In terms of their desires, it's the same. We want to be secure against market manipulation. We want to grow in a scalable way. There are these assets that we want to list, have fragmented liquidity. How do we price them? Should we like whitelist them as margin in an isolated or cross margin fashion? Like a lot of the same things. And then if it's like very bespoke, I think we'll look at the protocol, we'll speak to the team and try to suss like how much work is this? How different is this than kind of the products that we built so far? And make a decision like, okay, we want to kind of invest resources into building out a platform to support this team. In terms of the bundle, it's usually those three things. It's like a risk portal with alerts. It's parameter recommendations, so building the simulation models to update the protocol based on the changing market conditions. And then it's just deploying like a risk or price oracle or proof of reserve oracle via edge so that they're actually hooked up in real time. I think that's like high level. Happy to dive into any part of that, but that's more or less the process, at least conceptually.
And then maybe what do some of like the concrete deliverables look like, right? Are you feeding these recommendations just to the team to then implement? Are you building a lot of the stuff in public for then communities to make decisions around?
Yeah, so the deliverables, if everything that we ship has there's like a privacy settings, right? So teams can decide if they want, on the level of the chart, you want this to be public facing or just something that's internal. Some of these things may like unnecessarily cause FUD or something. So they can kind of decide what they want to be community facing. Deliverable is a risk portal with alerts that goes live. There's webhooks connected to like any channel you want. If it's like Slack, Telegram, I don't know, email, you can get the alerts wherever you want or just come see them through the portal. Parameter recommendations, they get piped into the portal, but they also get piped into the Edge risk oracle and proof of reserve oracle. And you can just connect your smart contracts to it. There's like a pretty easy interface for it. So those, I think, are the three main deliverables, risk portal plus alerts, the parameter recommendation simulation, and that gets piped via an Edge oracle integration where you just get everything in real time.
Yeah, 100%. Like as I've kind of thought about building like our sales team on the protocol services side, you really need to be able to like talk the talk, and there's no way around that. I think founders in this space can like sniff out a salesperson a mile away. So actually being able to be conversational in the pressing issues these teams are facing, and then almost have it like come out organically that, hey, we're struggling with this, or we could use some help. And it's like, all right, well, we provide this type of service to this type of clientele. And then, okay, hey, this something here can make sense.
Is it for you, has that also like played out in practice, like in the team that you've built for the protocol services? Is the background just like more degens, like on-chain people, or were you able to like train people who came from different backgrounds, maybe more TradFi, that ended up like ramping up really well to crypto?
So a little bit of a mix. I'm biased towards having people with a research background, right? So I kind of started as analyst number one with Messari 6 years ago, end up sales pilling. So some of our brightest research guys who I know sort of have that personality, like to just speak with teams. Yeah, I mean, we've hired from kind of node software companies, ideally people that have been in crypto and again, can talk the talk. I always, kind of preach like knowing enough to be dangerous. And I think that's, enabled like a lot of success and just genuine connections with founders and like this real builders you were kind of talking about before.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's been similar for us too.
On a related note, from the BD side, have you guys, well, I know you have, but gone like the DAO path? I'm curious, like any hot takes or just thoughts about like the B2 DAO process in general from the service provider's perspective?
Yeah, wow, a lot of thoughts. This is an unsubstantiated claim, and maybe Messari is on par with this, but I feel like in terms of sales to DAOs, I think we're up there, like top 3, top 5, and so a lot of lessons. Yeah, I would say that first of all, DAO is, what does that even mean? Because there's just like there's a DAOs that in the end of the day, it's honestly you're just talking to the founders and they own like 90% of supply, and that's where it's at, and it feels a lot more traditional. And then there's Aave and Maker, where you are running a campaign, you are talking to delegates, you are hearing everybody out, and also dealing with their PTSD with previous service providers and assuring them that you're different. So there's a lot there. I think that it's really important to kind of understand who your champions are, like in the DAO, who are the decision makers and who is just loud. Sometimes it's not the same person. In fact, oftentimes that's the case. So yeah, I think that is, and I think like before you go to vote, before you go publicly, you just also need to understand, like, is there a desire for this versus sometimes you see a lot of service providers that are kind of disconnected, throwing their hat in the ring, and it's not even clear that anybody wants what they're doing, and that tends to not go over well. So I don't know, be thoughtful, try to connect with the right people, try to lead with value. Because like you said, people can smell a salesman a miles away. It's okay to get compensated for doing good work, but just meet them where they're at and don't try to like shove your cookie cutter thing into what they need and hear them out. And I think that's been good for us. So I don't know if that's super generic and not helpful, but that's been the experience thus far.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. And yeah, having gone through these maybe a dozen times on our end, I think it's one of the things where it's not fully reinventing the wheel from like a BD process where, in normal like Web2 SaaS sales world, where you have the people like the spray and pray approach where they're sliding your LinkedIn DMs like, hey, you need help with your CRM system, and like you see the equivalent of that in DAO world of service providers just like out of the blue throwing a forum post saying like, hey, give us 50K to do this, and it's like no one asked for that. There are still kind of like the key decision makers that are worth talking to get a pulse for like where they're at, and then kind of connecting two and two with, hey, this is what you guys do. This is what we need. There's a fit. Now let's bring this conversation to the public and take it from there. And obviously it can get a little messy in DAO world. There are, drawbacks to, having to yell at anonymous frogs on forums, but
I think, let's say this, if you can do sales in crypto to beat the DAO, I think you're kind of going to be good everywhere else, right? Because things, like you said, get pretty crazy and ridiculous in this world. But I think it's a good training ground. It's rough, but it's good.
Do you think the current process like makes a ton of sense where, say, okay, you guys go to an Aave and it's like, hey, we have these risk services, this is the cost, this is the value, and then token holders vote on it. What percentage would you say of token holders are like actually in a position to make an informed yes or no decision kind of on the basis of like the value, like something deeply technical can provide and like weighing that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely gotten better, like over time. I think like today, the pattern that you see is delegates and professional delegates, and these are people that like live and breathe the protocol and like understand it. I think very early on, there were like very vocal people who had like were able to get like a Twitter following and have like really like snippy comments, but there were people who really had no idea what they were talking about. They might have been super young, never even like worked a job, and great at like getting engagement on Twitter, and you ended up kind of debating and arguing with like a lot of folks that didn't even kind of have any influence like in the voting process besides their own personal accounts. So it's gotten better. I feel that it's gotten more professional. I think there's also the selection bias here. I think today we've gotten burned by this, right? Like there's such a wide spectrum of people in crypto. And I think when we were getting started, anybody who wanted to work with us, we were down because we were super early stage startup and we needed to grow. Today, like a big part of our like partnering process is just diligencing the team. Like it's a real team. Like who knows them, who has worked with them, because our kind of service and product and platform and integration, it's a non-trivial lift, and we want to partner with people that we can work with in the long run. Almost all of our customers at this point, we've worked with for multiple years. Aave renewing for year 3, Benki year 3, Venus, I think over 2 years. Like we actually like kind of grow and get deeper with them over time. So that's what we're looking for. So I think today, and we learned this the hard way from working with a lot of not kind of great teams early on. So maybe there's selection bias there, but I'll say at the top of like more successful protocols, it feels a lot more professional than it did 2 years ago.
And I think that's a really good point around, needing to be kind of selective with who you work with, and not just saying like, oh, well, they have a fat treasury and can pay us money. Like that's awesome. That can bump our numbers. But when there's a lot of resources that go into what you're providing, right? That's an opportunity cost, because that's taking resources away from what could be a higher long-term value customer. So maybe from some of those engagements that didn't work out as well, or having done this like customer diligence now for a couple of years, like what are some things you look at? Like, is it just, the kind of founders like pedigree? Like, is there other, green flags, red flags that typically signal whether or not a customer will be a good long-term one?
Yeah, I mean, pedigree helps, I guess, give some signal, but I wouldn't say it's the main one. I think for me, it's like, it's trying to really understand like, hey, what is the value that I provide for this team, and is it real? And if interests are aligned and, they're reasonable and they're serious, then usually it works out. I think that one thing that became a pattern, I think, as we got bigger, it was, being audited or partnering with Chaos. We started seeing that the teams thought it was like a signal. So a lot of teams would come to us and they were like, it was a weird process. They wanted to sign something quickly. As soon as we signed, they like slapped the logo on the website, and that's super like complimentary and like comforting. But you could tell like whether or not they needed the service or not, and or if they understood the need for the service. I think everybody needs risk and security. Whether or not it's something you prioritize is a different question altogether. So just like understanding, like, does the team understand why this is important? Are they reasonable? What are negotiations like? Are they measured? Because in the end of the day, risk is something that the flip side of risk is like growth, right? And so it's something that inevitably we work really close with the founding team and decision makers there. And when they understand why it's valuable and what this enables, and it's a really good partnership, and we grow very close. If it's a team that is doing it because they think they need to do it, sort of like a smart contract audit, and they don't care for it, I think that's where it's worked out less well historically. So it's just like understanding, does this make sense for both sides? If it does, usually it won't fall on anything else, because we're pretty, I think, fun to work with. We work hard, we're available, we care, truly. And yeah, so it's just like, does it make sense for both sides?
Yeah, totally checks out. So maybe switching gears, because I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I want to give it some time. So Edge and kind of getting to some of the Oracle work you guys been doing. Yeah, maybe start just like high level how or what the genesis was of that, and then maybe where you're at now.
Yeah, so the genesis, I think, like a lot of the products that we build and how we kind of build our roadmap, is that it came from the customers. So we started. There was this initial need like, hey, we need to understand when something is wrong, or when value at risk has increased, or how to update the parameters. And we're like, cool. And we built out that initial system that had kind of the risk portal and the parameter recommendations. But there was still like this massive gap, right? And the massive gap was, in order to kind of realize a change on chain, it would take on average like 4 to 5 days, which was insane, right? Because if you think about what goes into it, so our system would make a recommendation, and then the team would probably have to go copy and paste it, craft a Solidity payload or whatever, something for Solana or for the Cosmos environment, maybe get it audited, potentially go through governance. And what that means is that even today, effectively for anyone who doesn't work with us and has risk oracles, risk management is static, right? So it is only reactive. And the best you can do is try to be like prudent in how you're configuring these systems. The time where it really became clear was during the USDC DPEG. So it was like one of the worst events in the industry. Aave was a few cents away from being riddled with like hundreds of millions of bad debt. And we literally had nothing that we could do because the fastest change that you could make via governance was 3 days. So this was like an obvious thing. Crypto is risky, crypto is dangerous, even more so than TradFi. TradFi is real time. So we certainly need something here that's real time and reduces the operational overhead of writing payloads, more smart contract audits, and so on. So Risk Oracles is easy, rolling out now to the whole team, to the whole kind of customer portfolio. Price rose from that, right? Because the way that we view it, like price and risk, they're inextricable, right? Like price is a single data point that you can derive from understanding the broader market structure. In fact, you don't always want price with the applications that we deal with. It's equally important to understand market depth, have liquidity indicators, because from that, is this market manipulatable? Like if it is, how does that affect the amount of leverage we allow to take on it, and so on and so forth. So that's where price came out, and that's why our price oracles are different. They have our risk engine on top of it, and we can take a bunch of kind of things into consideration when we're kind of putting out that single data point that other teams do not. It's very, very much different than I think what is considered best practice or was historically, which is a median between a few centralized or decentralized exchanges in terms of spot. So that is on the price. Obviously, also made it faster and smaller payload optimized. So Jupiter seeing like a 80% decrease in payload size, 70% decrease in price staleness. So on the infra side, my background is in performance and optimization. So just also want to make sure that we can win there. The last thing is proof of reserves or proof oracles, right? And here we call it a proof oracle and not a proof of reserves oracle, because the broader vision was we want to be able to import data from any external network. So it could be Arbitrum to Ethereum, but it could also be the internet to Ethereum, right? With tokenization and kind of traditional finance giants coming on chain, their data requirements and the type of things that they want to be able to provide on chain is just becoming more sophisticated. And I think this is huge, right? Being able to kind of support this broad level of tokenization and move away from a model where we're just trusting a BlackRock to play nice, because effectively this is why we're here, in order to kind of eliminate trust to the extent possible. So building that is also, I think, crucial for this next stage in the evolution of on-chain finance. And that's where Edge was born. Like, how do we make things more actionable? How do we make it real time? How do we make the models that we're doing like an integral part of protecting, optimizing, and growing these applications?
And so do you see Edge as more kind of like a general purpose Oracle solution, or something that's maybe like more specialized for some like tailored use cases where like it can just be better, faster, cheaper, safer in, again, more kind of tailored circumstances?
I think better, faster, cheaper is it's always true. But I think from like an infrastructure perspective, like it's a good race to the bottom, right? So like the oracles are improving, latency is going down, reliability, we're adding nines every year to what every team is doing across the board. Maybe some teams are a little faster, other teams are a little slower, but oftentimes that's not what's going to make or break the protocol. I think that there's like the financial and then the rest of the world kind of thing. And I'll speak a little bit maybe about the research we just published with the head of model eval at OpenAI. But for us, it's like, okay, so the base assumption is that this thing is fast, this thing is reliable, this thing is secure, but where is the value going to come, right? So I think in early 2020, having any oracle was valuable, and if you could get the price of Bitcoin on chain, that was a big deal, right? And today I would argue that it's not. There are a bunch of like oracle providers that can give you the price of Solana, the price of Ethereum, the price of Bitcoin in kind of different ways. But when we think about where the space is going and the explosion of tokenization and L2s and app chains and all of these different siloed ecosystems, fragmentation is huge. And when fragmentation becomes big and you have all of these new nascent assets, liquidity is thin. And then suddenly it becomes a big question, maybe the hardest question. How do I price this asset, right? Okay, it's an LST, it's an LRT. There's this redemption queue. So there's a time to redemption that I need to take into consideration. You have a stable coin that's kind of regulated and under the jurisdiction of the New York Financial Department of Services. But should I only be looking then at the price of secondary market liquidity, or should I be taking other things into consideration? And this is like getting smart about how we price assets, how we kind of marry security, risk, and market data together. That's where we think we can bring extra value. And I think in a high level, it's just all about getting the highest integrity and highest signal data, using that as input to the model, and then going the extra mile and providing value. So for us, like oracles, the next stage of oracles will no longer be, let's build a reliable pipe between Web 2 to Web 3 and give you the median without really understanding what it means for your app. It's getting more specific and bespoke. And this really makes sense. Like if you think about any successful Web 2 application, they're not consuming like an off-the-shelf API for their most critical kind of data, right? It's optimized for the use case. So high level, that's where we're going, I think, with it. And that's where we think we can, yes, we're fast, lowest latency, lowest price staleness, but in the end, I think that will look kind of similar across different oracles. And then it's where else can you bring value?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so kind of being the best at what you do in this, focused area versus trying to just do it all. But also rewinding a sec. So you said you guys are doing some research with, was it the head of model eval at OpenAI?
Yes. So we published, I think, the first of, I think, a lot of things that are in the pipeline, not only with OpenAI, some of the other leading frontier models that we're going to share soon. When we were building the prediction market oracle, I think there was just fundamentally, and our approach was different than what happens today in the market. So today in the market, I think for poly markets, which is the largest prediction market, they use UMA Oracle. And UMA Oracle resolves real world events by humans or token holders of UMA voting, right? Mm-hmm. And this has been like kind of rife with conflict, manipulation, resolving markets in the wrong way. And just kind of looking at that, I think it was like clear, to, at least to me, that the future of this is probably not humans voting on every single event. There are just real problems with human bias and scalability and conflict of interest and so on. So what can we do that's kind of driven by technology? And speaking to Wintermute, we said, okay, we're going to do this with LLMs. Like some of these LLMs are testing across specific domains, like ChatGPT and Anthropic with 140 IQ, or like sounds reasonable. And in order to answer a question of, who won the election the day after the election, I'm pretty sure that LLM will be able to kind of solve this very easily. And it turns out that's not the case. There's a lot of things that you need to do in order to ensure kind of the accuracy, the precision, the safety, and reduce hallucinations across these models. So that's where we've been doing a lot of research. I think from a product-facing perspective, it just means we have a really strong and accurate prediction market oracle. But beyond that, I think chaos started in tackling this question of around the edge oracle with data integrity for numerical data. What is the price? What is the volatility? What is the liquidity? And those are kind of easy to start with because it's easy to benchmark yourself and know like what your level of deviation is. And now we're getting into unstructured data, right? So who won the election is an example. It's a good case study, but being able to solve this well, understanding what really happened has a lot of other implications in crypto and out of crypto. So that is something that we're going to be speaking more about over the coming weeks and months, and something that we're really excited about internally.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually fascinating. I haven't thought much about that, but I mean, right, given how nascent sort of the LLMs we know today are, right? It's not like they've been in prod for a decade plus and have been battle tested for a while, but they're also improving at a breakneck pace. Like, do you see a world where they can play a meaningful part in getting or being that like objective source of truth to then get data on chain? Or is like the risk too high putting it in this, not black box, but something that with the potential for hallucinations or manipulations or wrong data essentially?
Yeah. So I think like fundamentally, the first thing is like, do I believe in the technology or not, or will the technology continue to improve at a rate in which it's usable? I think the answer is yes. I can speak at length about like how they're structured and architected. Out of the box, they won't do it, but there are a lot of kind of systems and layers of verification and security that you can put on top to ensure that you're going to get pretty good precision. I mean, internally, we've back tested it. It's already performing better with higher precision than any kind of UMA oracle, for example, that ever resolved markets, right? So yes, like that's where the technology is going to go. It won't only be prediction markets. I think we're just in the early innings of seeing agents and agentic workflows taking over. It's extremely powerful if you have it wired and configured and built in the right way. And it's way too it unlocks too much productivity to not justify the amount of resources that are going to be poured into kind of making this prod ready, not only in crypto, just across the world. That one part that you said is interesting is black box. It is going to be, I think, there are some models that are open source, but others like frontier models like Anthropic and OpenAI, which are not. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
they will be. It's actually like the weights for these models is honestly, it's a matter or can become a matter of national security. And
Yeah.
I think recently, I think it was publicized that the former head of NSA joined OpenAI's board, and there's good reason for this. So you're going to have this really interesting friction where you have this amazing like AI that can do a lot and open up like a lot of use cases. At the same time, it's going to be a black box, but there are a lot of let's say truth overlays and verification overlays that you can put on top of it to at least kind of restrain and have guardrails for what you do. Like, I'll give an example today for the risk oracles, and it's kind of like maybe a wonky analogy, but like when we have a risk oracle deployed in Aave, it doesn't mean that we have carte blanche. There's like this governance framework where we can make changes within a specific bound, right? So the team might not know like everything that's happening, but they do have this guarantee like, hey, you're not going to get rugged. Like this is, if a change happens, this is part of the SLA of opening a position in an application. And I think they're same, but different, but a lot of things that we're going to be able to do for these models to increase kind of traceability, explainability, observability, security, and trust. So that is going to be interesting. I think we're on the front lines actually in crypto solving these problems, because connecting an LLM or a council of AI oracles to a prediction market, I think is like one of the first, at least super public cases in which AIs are directly settling and moving financial value.
Yeah.
So we're running into these really early, because in crypto we do everything fast, but it's something that's the whole world will need as well too.
So we just touched on, I guess, what are some like the threats to the business. So maybe last question for you, like, what are you most fired up about in terms of Chaos's business over, call it, the next 12 months?
A ton. I was telling the team this week that like just like in the past few months, I've had this excitement come back that I don't think, if I'm being honest, that I haven't had since like the first like 6 months of the business. Not to say that it wasn't fun, but there were like a lot of rough patches and the pivots and the bear market and just figuring things out. Look, we built like a really healthy business, and that's continuing to grow. And that's, I think, in the realm of what everybody knows about Chaos until today, as a risk platform and with edge oracles and all of these things. But there's some pretty big stuff that we're working on internally, which really expands the vision of what we do and what problems we solve. And those have just like, I find that like really inspiring now, and I'm just really excited to show the world what we're building. And so I know that's like an annoying answer because I'm not really specifying, but next month at the Chaos Summit in Bangkok around DevCon, we're going to speak about it more, and I think it's going to be great. So I'm pretty fired up.
I love it. Well, I'll be waiting at the edge of my seat to find out more on that. But this is an awesome conversation, Omer. Really appreciate taking the time. I guess any last parting words or anything else you want to say about how to keep up with everything you guys are working on?
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's for Friday morning for whoever sees this recording, and really appreciated you reaching out, and it was a great catch up. Yeah, just for catching up, I'm Omer Goldberg on Twitter or chaos_labs. We're really responsive. Yeah, reach out. And Jack, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
All right, see ya. Bye.